Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the third Asia-Pacific Cleaner Partnership Joint Forum. I am Caterina Meloni, founder of Connecting Founders, and I'm honored to be your host and moderators for this session, where we'll be talking about the future of sustainable transport, electric mobility, and digitalization to address air pollution. First and foremost, I'd like to recognize our partner, the Asian Development Bank, who has helped make this session possible. So thank you very much. Now, today we talk about sustainable transport. Transport is a necessity for many of us, probably all of us, but it's also a main source of air pollution in many of our cities and has a negative impact on our health, especially in densely populated urban cities such as Bangkok, where I'm joining from, and pretty much any other large city in the region. Now, the conversation about sustainable transport has changed considerably in the past year and a half as we navigate the health, economic, and social crisis brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. But as in the case of any crisis, that also brings opportunities, the opportunities to learn from the past and the opportunities to do better as we rebuild and reopen our economies. Now, the pandemic has showed the impact of restricting travel and movements. We close offices, we close schools, we close industries. And this, even though we don't wish to prolong it any longer than necessary, and it's certainly not something sustainable for the future, it has brought light and made even more evident the link between transport and air pollution. And at the same time, we've seen the rapid acceleration of digitalization and e-commerce. Most of our cities, many of us have become reliant on motorbikes for deliveries of food, deliveries of any kind, and it's very hard to imagine life without them. So now, as we slowly reopen and we rebuild, it's important to try to look at the possibility of shifting towards a transport that is more sustainable, that fits our needs, but it's also kinder to the environment. And that's the reason why we're here today talking about electric mobility. Now, before we start, it would be great to learn a little bit more about you joining from the audience, where you're joining us from, who you are. So we created a poll, and you should be able to see it on your screen if you scroll down towards the bottom left part of your screen. So please, I invite you to fill out the poll. Thank you. I can see quickly. Can we also put it up on the screen, perhaps? Okay. So just a few more seconds. I'll figure it out myself. Okay. Okay, it looks like it keeps moving, but I think we can see that we have a strong representation from aid agency, civil society, and which is the bulk of our audience, but also enough representations from the private sector and business owners themselves. We also have a healthy representation from government. So I think it's wonderful. We have a very diverse audience, and that will be tremendous when it comes to the Q&A and the lively discussion. So thank you everyone for joining us, regardless where you're joining from. I would like to also encourage you from the beginning to put your questions in the chat. There will be time later on for a Q&A with speakers, and we'll also be drawing from the chat, so please go ahead with that. Now, let's watch a 1-minute video on moving forward electric public transport. Thank you for the video. It was wonderful to see some of those images, clearly very recognizable. I think it makes us miss traveling even more. But let me now invite Mr. Bert Fabian, Program Officer of Sustainable Mobility Unit at UNEP, to introduce the session. Please take it away, Bert.
Thank you very much, Katrina, and thanks again for helping us organize this session alongside with Pam of the Asian Development Bank. In the opening session and in the high plenary session, many speakers have made reference to race to zero, carbon neutrality, building back better. Rosamund Kisi Debra from the UK, whose child of 9 years old died due to air pollution, she mentioned, as many times as you go to various meetings and conferences, one element that is always constant and always raised is transport. So our sector, we always have this problem of dealing with the transport sector and how to reduce emissions. We in the UN Environment Program, we are leading this global electric mobility program together with the International Energy Agency, the ADB. We have a program to promote public transport, cycling and walking, again, with various partnerships with other organizations. We have efforts to improve or to have more cleaner fuels in vehicles. The vehicles that are imported to us, imported to some countries. So these are the challenges that we have, and these are the activities we have in terms of addressing this issue of transport emissions. In this session, and you have mentioned it, Katerina, we want to get the experiences of the countries, individuals, companies in dealing with the transport sector. And in particular, looking into the future, we see electrification and digitalization as one of the two most promising trends or technologies, if you like. But there are barriers, certainly. There are impacts. What about the poor? Can they take advantage of this digitalization? I think we have experiences from the panels as well. At the country level, how do you support this? Does electric mobility, does it really improve air pollution? What about the big private sector companies? What are they going to do about it, or what their plans are? So we hope through this session and through this partnership in the Asia Pacific Clean Air Partnership, we can capture these experiences, share it widely, but also learn from it and integrate it into the activities of organizations like us, who are going to have these global projects or national projects on electrification and also digitalization. So I guess I stop here, and I definitely look forward to our discussions. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much, Bert. Thank you for introducing the session. And now on to the main part. I am joined today by a stellar panel of experts working in the field of electric mobility. It's a very exciting session. Our first guest is the co-founder of Alloy Technology, which has been at the forefront in supporting the development of the three-wheeler industry in Kathmandu, Nepal. She was recognized as Young Champions of the Earth from Asia Pacific by UNEP in 2019 and as the National Geographic Society 2020 Emerging Explorer. Please welcome Mrs. Sunika Manandar. Hi, Sunika. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. And please tell us a little bit more about alloy technology and the impact of your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina and Joselapa from Nepal. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, UN Environment Program and ATP, for inviting me to this APCAP forum today to share my story and also about our work at Alloy Technologies. And again, today I'd like to start with a story. I don't have a presentation slide. I'd like to start with a story of Miss Devi Shrestha. I call her Devi Didi. Didi is basically sister. She's one of the informal sector drivers in Nepal. And what is unique about her is she drives the electric minibus. And why her story really struck me was, when I talked with her, she talked about different phases of her life, phases of her career in this electric minibus sector, which proved that the journey of distrust that she has struggled with is quite interesting for everyone to know. Let me start with the journey of distrust that she had when she started learning driving back 13 years back, when none of the drivers were trusting her to teach her driving because she was a woman, right? But then she was super she had a lot of perseverance, and then she got to train herself as a driver. And what she started as a driver, now she owns 2 electric minibuses after 13 years. After 5 years, she was able to, finance a battery, and in partnership with the other vehicle owners, she was able to run in the road with the electric vehicle. And after some years, she was able to also get herself as an owner. She could buy another electric vehicle. And by the time that happened, her husband, who is a migrant worker who used to work abroad, she was also able to buy another minibus for him to come back to Nepal to work in the electric vehicle sector. So that's kind of a trajectory of how a person like Devi become an entrepreneur herself, and to see the trajectory of her entrepreneurial journey was quite interesting to me. What does not fit in my mind is, even today, after 13 years, the journey that she started as a journey of distrust is still there. Right now, one of her minibus, electric minibus, is just rusting in garage because she's not able to get the finance to get or to finance the vehicle battery for that second minibus, right? The banks or the formal microfinances are not trusting her because they don't know she is in the informal sector. She has no credit history. She has no digital footprint whatsoever. But she has been working for 13 years, but then she does not have any digital or income proof that she can show to these microfinances and banks, right? Which is why she's really in problem right now. Now this industry, let's talk about this electric vehicle industry. It is also quite unique to Nepal because it started back in mid-1990s, and it was launched. 700 of fleet of these electric minibuses were launched back in mid-1990s. That really made Kathmandu a green city pioneer, because at that time, world didn't have that much of electric vehicle running in public transportation. But unfortunately, the same city, which was called a green city pioneer, is today suffering air pollution that's 5 times higher than the safe level. And from the latest data, what's said is 42,000 people dies premature death every year because of air pollution. And this is not just the problem of Nepal, right? Globally also, from the data, 4 million early death happens just because of air pollution. And yet 1% of global development aid only goes to tackle this problem. And the latest data that I researched a bit, and latest data also says that government around the world gave 20% more to fossil fuel projects than to solve the problem that is caused by those projects, right? So it is quite a mismatch in my head again, and who suffers? Who suffers really? We have the solution, we have the grassroots solution led by people like Devi Shrestha, who are the unsung heroes, unsung climate heroes. I like to call them a climate ninja, that have been working for years, but then their work is not highlighted enough so that they can get the kind of financing that they deserve to being a climate hero and to be supporting these innovative models, but then from the grassroots level, right? For me, she's not just a driver, she's an entrepreneur. And she's not just an entrepreneur, but the climate hero. But what is happening is, what is lacking that I see is not just the environmentally intentional financing instruments, but also gender intentional approaches to these financial instruments, right? And that brings me to what Alloy does, my company Alloy. We bridge this financing gap between the funders and micro entrepreneurs like Devi by using digital tokens. What we do is we are similar to a micro lending platform. I know I'm sort of time, but I'll end very soon, Katerina. We are similar to a micro lending platform for microfinances and banking sector, but with real-time fund tracking and impact analysis. So what we do is we actually tell them where their money is going and what kind of impact it is giving, which means the trust level is slightly increased than the traditional approaches. And recently we had the success story where we're able to have an agreement with a commercial bank to make sure that these women drivers in the electric minibus sector will be getting financing 5 times cheaper than the usual rate. So that's the success story that we have currently, and we help channel these kind of impact financing from anyone, from development sector, private sector, towards these grassroots micro entrepreneurs. And this really, with this, we are really hitting the 2 of the SDGs. One is SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 13, climate action. And I'd like to end with something that I really believe, that we don't need large-scale projects to solve global problems, right? What we need is we need to build a financing instruments to help these grassroots micro entrepreneurs, grassroots innovations like this to foster and get the kind of financing that they need, and we are good to go. That's something that I really believe. And finally, I'd like to share a way how we can connect. So audience who are viewing us today can connect us through this links, and we have pretty exciting news coming up, which I cannot yet announce here. So please feel free to connect, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunika, and thank you for bringing attention to the fact that there are also a lot of the unsung heroes, or as you put them, the climate ninjas that are in there small, participating to more sustainable transport. I think that's a very valuable lesson. So next, our next guest has devoted more than 20 years to study the pollution caused by motor vehicles. He is a professor at the School of Environment and Associate Dean at the Graduate School at Tsinghua University in Beijing, China. Please welcome Professor Wu Ye. Thank you, Professor Ye.
Thank you. Hi, Katerina. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So it's so nice and to see the old friends here, but it's long time no see. And previously, Sonika shared her nice story in Nepal, and I would like to see some words for the environmental and the climate benefits from the e-mobility in China. And here I do have a couple of slides, and let me share the next. Okay, so from here you can see, so over the past 10 years, so globally, you will see a very fast increase of the electric vehicles in pretty much all the countries of the world, and especially in China. And you see pretty much the fastest growth in and by last year, our EV population has reached nearly 5 million. And last year, our president Xi also announced the peak of the carbon emissions by 2030 and a carbon neutral goal by 2060. And it's a very ambitious goal for China to reach. And definitely among these two goals, the mobility is one of the major tasks. And when we look into the mobility in science committee, there's a lot of the debate because from this chart, you clearly see, although the battery electric vehicles are the zero emitters on the road, but they may switch their emission from the upstream, for example, the power generation. So, in China and as well as other Asian countries, we still have relying on a large portion of the coal power. And on the other hand, from the refinery to battery and the environment impacts from the battery production and also the material recycling is another major topics. So that's why if we try to compare the electric vehicles with other gasoline and diesel vehicles, we have to develop the life cycle methodologies to do such a comparison. And over the past, so in Tsinghua, our team has developed the life cycle database to compare the environment and climate impacts between these different vehicle technologies. But the good issues for the electric vehicles very recently, because of the higher the penetration of renewable power, and also we have the advanced batteries in penetrated to the electric vehicles market. So we clearly see the air pollutant emissions decrease by time. And from these two charts, you can see if we use the life cycle point of view, electric vehicles can substantially reduce VOC emissions, which is an important precursor of ozone and the secondary particles. And at the same time, the NOx, we can also achieve some benefits from there, but we have to pay special attention to the fuel and vehicle material. And in terms of the greenhouse gases emissions, so far, we find that no matter it's light-duty passenger cars or buses or light-duty trucks, clearly we see the benefits compared with its gasoline or its diesel counterparts. So, and over the time, and you will see, and more benefits can be achieved by the electric vehicles because more penetration of the renewable energy and also the battery advancement. And very recently, we have done air quality analysis for electrification for 2030 in China. And we use three major regions: the eastern part of the China, the Jing-Jin-Ji region, the Yangtze Delta region, and Pearl River Delta region, which are the three most developed regions in China. And we can see for the next 10 years, when we penetrate more electric vehicles, we can achieve the air quality benefits for both particles, ozone, and nitrogen dioxide. And especially in the metropolitan areas such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, those big cities, we achieve more air quality benefits. And that means because most of the people lived in the downtown areas. So from that point of view, the fleet electrification can avoid a lot of the people for the premature deaths due to the improved air quality. And the very interesting issue, when we compare the monetary values for the air quality with the climate changes, seems for the next 5 to 10 years, the benefits for the air quality is even higher than the climate change benefits. So that's very interesting issues. So let me stop from here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu. Up next is the head of business solutions at Gojek. Now, Gojek is a household name for anybody working in technology. It's one of the biggest transportation network companies in the world, and it's one of the first unicorns in Southeast Asia. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Andy Protomo. Hi, Andy. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Katrina. Yep, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, right? Would love to extend my gratitude to be able to kind of share a few stories about, future of mobility, as well as, how we are looking at electric vehicles specifically within us, right? I have a few slides that let me share my screen to do so. Yep. All good. Right. So I mean, if you look at the global trends, right? What are the key trends shaping the future of mobility globally, right? So number one is electrifications, right? Today, I think xEV makes a small percentage of new vehicle sales, but I think in the future that will grow to 20 to 40%, especially in urban areas as infrastructure getting rolled out, right? Cars are or vehicles rather, getting more smarts as IoT is becoming mainstream. More and more of this car will talk to each other, will talk to its infrastructure, right? So connectivity is a key theme, emerging key themes, right? And then as these cars getting more kind of smart and connected, right? Autonomous is going to play a major role on how cars is going to be driving around, right? I think now 1% of vehicles sold are equipped with kind of level 1 or level 2 autonomy. I think more and more as the technology gets more mature, self-driving cars is going to be the norm here, right? And as already you can see where Gojek plays a big role in Indonesia is we're going to see shared mobility gaining mainstream, meaning vehicle ownership is no longer kind of the norm, right? People are more going to be more liberated on choosing how do I commute from my office, what kind of vehicles, and that going to detach from the ownership of that vehicle itself, right? Now, today I'm going to focusing on or deep dive on electrifications. Why? Because I think number one, we've seen that EV is at unstoppable momentum, right? I think Professor Wu Ye mentioned China, for example, is the mostly advanced country in Asia, arguably, in terms of EV development, right? As you can see, most of Western Europe and Scandinavian countries actually lead the pack because they are heavily subsidizing EV, right? So I think affordability is a key kind of drivers on EV, right? And if you can see in the future, now we can already start seeing that BEV, pure battery electric vehicle is dominating the new vehicle model sales, right? The mainstream automakers such as such as Volkswagen and GM is investing a lot in this space, right? Now, if you look at the macro level, and now coming back to what is it for the country, right? For Indonesia, right? I mean, obviously the number one benefit is again reduction of CO2, right? I think direct emission pipe reduction is there compared between hybrid and pure BEV, right? 3x kind of the impact of direct tailpipe, right? And then we would love to actually see, again, selling this as environment might not be sufficient, but it should be also combined with EV is actually, if it the technology is designed meet to the market requirement, can actually be more affordable, right? Because it is arguably more cheaper to run, right? There is less moving components that is required to operate an EV. Therefore, we do believe that electric two-wheelers or motorcycles is what gonna drive adoptions of EV into Indonesia, because simply if you look at cost-wise, right, it is becoming more and more on par, if not it is cheaper to run, right, compared to ICE equivalent, right? And then we see in the enablers, right, key pillars of what makes the EV ecosystem works kind of start sprouting out, right, from the battery manufacturer in Indonesia. I mean, Indonesia arguably have the largest nickel reserve in the world. We start seeing two-wheel OEM coming into play with different models, right? Roll out into Indonesia. We see, Hyundai opening up a new factory in Indonesia. We see Toyota is more and more rolling out a few more hybrid, and also I think it will follow by BEV in the future, right? And BYD, right, as part of a China looking at to claim the EV leadership in this OEM space. And then we see also state-owned company like Pertamina and PLN start to develop infrastructures, right? Now, if you see, what does it take for us to start adopting, right? I think we need to see, again, I'd like the word here, collective, or what we call gotong royong in Indonesia, right? Working together towards a common goal, right? I think the common goal for EV should be, how do we bring this affordability into EV, right? If you look at, what are the components of two wheels, right? Obviously, bike is a key. It's a direct touch point between, the users and the technology itself, right? So the question here, how do you kind of make an initial capex that are comparable, right? How do you deliver riding experience comparable or even better, right? And for us in Indonesia, we use a motorcycle in a very heavy way, right? We use it to transport people, right? We use it to sometimes transport refrigerator on the back of the motorcycle. So it is really a motorcycle market, and how do we kind of design bike that are suits for that, right? And then if you look at inside the motorcycle itself, how do we reduce costs, because on the battery itself, because battery is arguably a 40% of what makes an EV, right? How the goal here, how do you kind of reduce capex to again bring costs to lower the cost for battery, right? Of which without scale, I think it's kind of impossible, but we need to start somewhere, right? And then the last one is about replenishment of energy. There is a lot of discussions about direct charge versus swaps. We do believe what really need to be able to solve is it's very hard to shift people's habit, right? So we need to deliver experience that are equivalent, if not better, to what's available in the market now, which is ICE, right? So how do we design all these three that can fit to what market needs, so that it can be affordable, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That was really very interesting, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions, so you can unpack it a little bit later on. Now, our next speaker is Deputy Director of the National Electric Vehicle Center at the Land Transport Authority of Singapore. He oversees efforts in electric vehicle industry and manpower development and research. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Long Chun. Mr. Chun, could you please briefly speak about Singapore's plan in the electric vehicle sector and your experience with that?
Sure. Thanks very much, Katerina. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, Katerina. Before I begin, maybe thank you very much for the UN Environment Programme and AADB to invite me to speak at this forum. Very happy to be here to share a bit about what Singapore is embarking on for electric vehicles. My name is Long Chun. I'm the Deputy Director of Singapore's Land Transport Authority under the National Electric Vehicle Centre. So I'm mindful of time, so I'll quickly run through the materials that I've presented. And definitely Singapore, we are very early in our journeys to transit to electric vehicles, but we can definitely would like to share with the wider audience today on some of our thinking and how we are working towards that. I think to begin largely, first would be to introduce our cleaner energy vehicle vision. We have set out a vision to actually phase out all internal combustion engine vehicles by 2040, and for all our vehicles to actually run on cleaner energy. And this would help reduce overall emissions from the land transport sector. This is driven, I think, by a lot of developments recently. Of course, I think one of the biggest push for it is that the cost of batteries have actually fallen significantly due to the advancements in battery manufacturing technology. This has definitely led to the reduction in cost of EVs and made upfront cost parity draw closer. Of course, alongside with the reduction in costs for practical reasons, definitely I think electric vehicles actually offers significant benefits to the environment, lesser tailpipe emissions, lesser noise pollution, and definitely in an urban city like Singapore, less heat generated. With that in mind, we actually announced earlier this year to make a strong push for electric vehicles. And as part of that, we have announced that we will be growing our charging network in Singapore, which I'll share over the next couple of slides. I think in our push for electric vehicles, a large part of that is to actually, as consumers, of course, the contribution to environment and larger sustainability goals is important. But I think definitely being cost conscious, I think consumers will also be looking at, what is the cost difference between your ICE vehicles today and actually electric vehicles, as Andy has also shared earlier in his presentation. I think in Singapore, we have also introduced schemes and incentives to actually reduce the cost of vehicles. And alongside of that, we also established targets actually by 2030 for all new car registrations to actually be cleaner energy models. For now, cleaner energy models, I think we are looking at disallowing internal combustion engine vehicles, and for vehicles to be of either electric, hybrid, or hydrogen fuel cells, which might be slightly further down the road. Early on, I touched on a bit about some of the schemes that we have for EV adoption. Today, actually, if you look at per kilowatt hour of batteries is about, I think, $136 US per kilowatt hour. And definitely, I think upfront cost parity has not arrived. Although if you look at the overall total cost of ownership over the entire life cycle for certain segments of users that are actually higher in mileage, they could actually achieve upfront cost parity. And this is due to, I think, also as covered earlier, the lower maintenance costs, the lower operating costs from charging instead of using fuel. I think one point that I would like to highlight here that's a bit more unique to Singapore is that Singapore, we are actually an island country. We are a very small nation. So I think we actually look at maintaining the amount of vehicles in Singapore, the total number of vehicles quite closely, because we are really quite a land constrained nation. So while we are making a push for electric vehicles to encourage definitely citizens to switch, if they need to own a vehicle, to switch from IC vehicles to electric vehicles. Actually, more than that, we are actually encouraging citizens to actually consider taking the public transport, taking our growing network of trains, and of course, public buses. One of the large push, I think, from the government's perspective on how we plan to drive EV adoption is actually to grow the number of charging points island-wide. Between EV charger infrastructure and EVs is often a chicken and egg, a catch-22 situation. Chargers are typically deployed when companies see that there's a sufficient business around for them to provide charging services. And on the other hand, if you are a consumer and a driver looking to purchase an electric vehicle, you will not purchase it if there's no charging infrastructure near you. So with that in mind, actually, we have announced targets to actually grow the number of charging points island-wide in Singapore. We have set a target for 60,000 chargers. In Singapore, when we are looking at the travel pattern of most of the motorists, we see that slow charging is likely going to be the most common mode of charging. Singapore, we are a very small island, and then if you look at the average mileage of our drivers, it tends to be around 50 km on a daily basis. Then given that your EVs today are already ranged for 300 km or even 400 km and above, typically motorists will only need to charge their vehicles once every 5 to 6 days on an overnight charging basis. Notwithstanding that, I think there is a need for complementary fast chargers to cater to certain segments, such as your taxi drivers, such as your private hire car drivers, such as Grab, Gojek, because to them, downtime on charging could translate to lost opportunities in terms of income. For our deployment of the charging infrastructure, we are taking a town-based approach across the whole of Singapore, where there is sufficient electrical capacity and where there's good geographical spread. We will deploy chargers in all these towns, and for all these towns to be actually every public car parks in these towns to be fitted with charging points. Lastly, is really to highlight the division that we are from. The Land Transport Authority is actually a government agency, the regulator for land transport under the Ministry of Transport for Singapore. The National EV Centre was actually just set up earlier this year. And as shared earlier, we are accelerating the deployment of charging infrastructure nationwide. We are working with the industry to actually enhance relevant regulations and standards in Singapore, and also develop the necessary ecosystem to help support the EV transition. So very happy to connect with anyone that has interest to explore collaborations or partnership with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Loong. Our final guest now is an experienced team leader with more than 20 years of international experience in the development and management of transport projects. Please welcome the Senior Transport Specialist from the Asian Development Bank, Mrs. Pamela Chiang. Hi, Pam. I know Pam is having some IT challenges. Let me know.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Katrina, for the kind introduction. And also, of course, thanks to Bert and UNEP for organizing this important session. So let me just start with the work we do in ADB. It's very much closely aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, ADB Strategy 2030, and the Paris Agreement, which you all know they all have climate change mitigation and adaptation objectives embedded within them. So on the SDGs, as you can see on the slide, although there is no dedicated transport sector SDG, transport sector projects in ADB do make meaningful contributions to various goals and targets in sectors such as water, energy, innovative infrastructure, sustainable cities, agriculture, and so forth. Now, moving across the page, you can see there is also Paris alignment. And ADB is working towards full alignment from 1st of July 2023, which is about 2 years' time. And the Paris Agreement really aims to keep the rise in global temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably to 1.5 degrees C compared to the pre-industrial levels. So finally, at the bottom right corner, just to mention that our pipeline is also designed in line with ADB Strategy 2030 operational priorities in mind. As you can see, the third OP is on tackling climate change, building climate and disaster resilience, and enhancing environmental sustainability. So I just wanted to share a bit more about the approach. We strive to promote e-mobility through a package of support, which can broadly be classified in this circular fashion. So let me start at the top right quadrant. We start with a technical assessment. And in this component, we typically have delivered several initial assessment of EV opportunities for several of our development member country clients. We've looked into commercial and business models for EV deployment, creating the enabling environment. And these lead to the next stage of project identification and development with our client countries. And I've included some sample projects that have been implemented for your reference. And the next important bit is on project financing. And as you all may be aware, ADB offers sovereign as well as non-sovereign loans for project financing. And oftentimes, we also bring in and we work with other multilateral development banks, UNEP, Green Climate Fund, GEF, etc., and other bilateral support to co-finance these investments. So to augment the benefits, we also seek to support knowledge sharing and capacity development, and this is to raise awareness on best practice project design, technical know-how, and this could be done through events such as this one that we're conducting right now, training opportunities, and of course, regional workshops. And so with this enhanced awareness and engagement with client governments and stakeholders, we can then continue the policy dialogue to continue to identify further areas of technical assistance. So for example, we're now planning to support development of net zero strategy roadmaps for our client governments. And the cycle continues, as you can see. So just to touch a little bit on the factors to consider when we package e-mobility projects, we look at quite a wide range of considerations, and these can be broadly categorized as, first of all, environmental factors. I think this slide probably is going to have some duplication with other speakers, what they've already mentioned, but it's great to see we're all on the same page on this. And so environmental factors includes things like the grid factor, emissions, and then there is a policy factor, say, for example, alignment with NDCs, national determined contributions and long-term strategies. Economic factors are important as well, like what is the fuel price, any subsidies, and what are the tax incentives to enable the e-mobility uptake. And fourthly, we also have financing, as discussed in the previous slides, and of course, and others have touched upon this. But it's also very important to note that there are business models and that need to be explored that are fit for purpose for the local context. And I think this touches upon Andy's point from the Gojek's perspective as well. And finally, material considerations also include things like whether or not charging infrastructure is readily available and how will the EVs be powered, battery life, disposal, charging, and so forth. So since time is quite limited today, I just wanted to share some charts and figures on the selected considerations that I've just mentioned. Now, the figure on the left shows the grid factor in the region. The red shading indicates areas with high grid factor, and these we typically consider high if they are above 0.8 kilograms CO2 equivalent of equivalent that is required to generate each kilowatt hour that is generated. So due to this high grid factor, we need to be quite mindful that deployment of EVs could only result in limited GHG reductions. But this is not to say that we do not support decarbonization of transport in these areas, but there is scope to then develop alternative strategy to promote low carbon trajectories through a combination of scaling up renewable energy production in country. And I think someone mentioned, I think in a previous session, it's a cross-sector and a multidisciplinary issue that needs to be tackled. And that holds very true in an ADB approach as well. So in these cases, we also look at alternative fuels, green hydrogen, and also conducting pilots to understand and fine-tune the EV strategies that could be appropriate for future scale-up. And the figure on the right shows the comparison of fuel prices across the region. And this is quite an important consideration because fuel prices contribute to the running cost of the vehicle. And so generally, the higher the fossil fuel prices in relation to electricity costs would create a positive environment for the EV uptake. And so this slide shows the lifetime GHG emissions of fossil vehicles. And I think this is at a lot more aggregate nature than what Professor Wu shared earlier. But nice to have a comparison across the different regions. And I think basically the key message from this chart is really showing that it ranges from the smallest emissions for the 2- to 3-wheelers to the large emitters contributed by urban buses and long-haul trucks on the right. And so when we look at projects in a country context, also it's important to generally also look at the share of the different transport vehicles in the local context and identify the most efficient mode to decarbonize. And so many of the projects that we have been involved in are things like BRT using e-buses. And this is effective in, number one, reducing GHG emissions by shifting people from the gasoline cars to the efficient public transport modes. And then the next level, reduction of GHG to be achieved if the EV is deployed for the urban bus system. So in this slide, I just wanted to share a little about how it's also important for to consider the local context of the policies and targets for each country. And here's a compilation by Asian Transport Outlook, which is a recent initiative in ADB. And understanding the vehicle-related targets and timelines are important, and Singapore is on there. And this is important for us to assess not just the readiness and ownership on potential EV ideas, but also to work with the respective client countries on the optimal support package of assistance. And so far, we've published 2 reports on this topic of e-mobility, and we have another one drafted to synthesize the wide range of e-mobility studies that we've undertaken. So watch this space, and I encourage you to have a look at these reports. And I think this is my final slide. I just wanted to share that we've recently secured funding to establish a support and investment platform for Asia and the Pacific. And this is in partnership with UNEP. BERT is involved, and we're grateful for the partnership. And we seek to deliver really 3 core areas of support. The first is to enhance capacity development of government, and mainly through establishing networks and communities of practice, providing training. The second component is catalyzing replication of high demonstration projects. We do this through establishing marketplace, bringing together private sector, industry experts, tech providers to accelerate uptake of e-mobility. And the final component is to support the development of project concepts for implementation through providing technical advisory and support on early project ideas. So I leave some of these other details in the slide in case it's of interest, but so I think whilst we've made headway on e-mobility, I do feel that there's still so much potential to do so much more, and together with our partners here today. So let me stop here and hand back to Katrina. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for the slides. It's also good to know that there is this new support coming to for the Asia Pacific region. Thank you to everyone for your very insightful contributions. Now, before we move to the Q&A, we have time for another poll, the second poll of the session. Again, as before, you should be able to see it on the left bottom part of your on the virtual platform. And this is related, we'd like to see how many of us in the room today own an electric vehicle. Just a few more seconds. Okay. So it looks like the majority of us are still it looks like the majority of us are still in the thinking stage. You're still considering purchasing an electric vehicle. Some of us already do have a car. I was surprised, Sonika. I thought at least you'd have a three-wheeler. But okay, so it's good to know that this is it's a lot of us that are considering an electric vehicle for the future. I think this is very positive. So let's start. We already have some questions in, but please feel free to add any additional chat in the function. Any questions you'd like to ask our speakers, any comment or any experience you'd like to share on the topic. So the first question, I think it's actually relevant for all of our speakers. And what I'd like to ask is if you can describe a little bit the key impact of electrification of transport in your city, particularly when it comes to how it affects everyday's life of the city residents. And if you can also comment a little bit on the potential impact on the employment. If you've seen, and this is based on your experience and what you've noticed so far. So perhaps we can start with, Sonika. Do you mind sharing your experience in Nepal? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Katerina. Definitely. I mean, in terms of the employment, that part I would like to touch upon. The industry that I talked about earlier, the Safa Tempo, which is a three-wheeler minibus sector, it definitely employs 700 of the electric vehicle drivers, and the impact that it makes in its family's life is huge. The only question that I'd like to ask here is, this industry actually started when I was 5 years old. Today I'm 31 years old, 6 times, I grew 6 times, but then this industry is still 700 and it have decreased to 500 and 200 of them are just sitting there in the garage. So that means in terms of employment, 200 of the jobs are cut. And, the environmental and then the income side, economic growth side is also very much impacted just because this industry is not really growing. In terms of key impact of electrification in the city, definitely in the winter in Kathmandu, you have to see the air. It just looks like the fog everywhere. And I was wondering if, if 60% of the transportation can be turned electric, how much of that fog could be avoided, right? So I'll let everyone to think about this question, and yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
May I ask Professor Wu to also comment on the impact on residents?
Okay, so I think how to affect the life of the residents. For example, in Beijing, so if you drive an electric car, so what kind of benefits you can achieve? First, you have, for example, in Beijing, we stop driving 1 day a week, right? So if you have a gasoline or diesel cars, but if you have an electric car, you are exempt from that restriction. So which means you can drive all the week. And the second, for example, if you drive an electric car in some cities in China, you are also exempt some restriction of the parking fees. For example, if you have an electric car, so you can exempt from the first 1 or 2 hours. So that's some benefits you clearly see. And also, I agree with Sonika. So when you have more and more electric vehicles, you will see a benefit for the air quality improvement. So far, it's hard for the people to link the air quality with the electric vehicles because the number is still small. So that's why you still see the air quality is bad in winters in many cities. But over the time, when you see more and more penetration of the electric vehicle, you will clearly see that benefit. So that's very important. In southern China, Shenzhen, so is a big city, already have more than 10% of the vehicles with electric. So we clearly see that, for example, the nitrogen dioxide concentration decline over time. So that's some benefit the citizens can feel from it. Okay.
Thank you. How about the experience of Singapore, Mr. Chun? Would you like to share that?
Okay, thanks very much, Katarina. Maybe I wouldn't go down to experiences yet. I think Singapore, we are just starting out. It's definitely not as progressive as some of the European nations and also China, as I think Professor Wu was sharing. But maybe I can highlight a couple of benefits, and if you split it into a couple of dimensions. From the environmental impact, definitely I think there will be reduced emissions. Today, about transport accounts for about 14% of all carbon emissions in Singapore. We did a study in terms of the impact to our carbon emissions if you transit all our light vehicles to electric vehicles. And we did a calculation and we can actually save or reduce the carbon emissions by almost about half. Right, so that is quite a significant shift from environmental perspective. Next, from a social perspective, I would say definitely is that I think there are benefits to residents. Of course, you have cleaner airs, less car pollution, less noise pollution. In an urban city where urban heat is very significant, there is also a slight effect in terms of reduction of urban heat. But more importantly, I think in Singapore, I think we announced earlier this year, the push to electric vehicles is just one of the moves towards more sustainable development in Singapore. We announced as part of a broader plan, what we call the Singapore Green Plan 2030, and it's to set out targets to actually move towards sustainable development. Moving towards electric vehicles is one of them, but there are other areas, for example, increasing solar deployment, looking at areas to improve building energy efficiency, reaching carbon neutrality for some of our buildings, including education institutes such as schools. Planting more trees in Singapore, creating a green environment. So I think in terms of the social side of the house, EVs is just one of the important pillars, I would say, towards a nationwide movement towards sustainable development. And then the last part that I will consider on the impact to citizens and impact to Singapore is definitely from the economic perspective. From the economic perspective, I think with the shift to electric vehicles, there is actually disruption to existing supply chain for existing automotive makers. And I think one example that we can highlight is definitely the aftermarket services. Today, you have a lot of workshops that actually work on your ICE vehicles, mechanical parts. With the shift to EVs and with the shift to electrification, what are some of the new skill sets that your workforce might require, right? With the deployment of charging infrastructure and chargers, the need to maintain the charging infrastructure, ensure that it provides a good service to to your consumers to charge their vehicles. These are some of the new jobs and economic opportunities that actually will come about.
It's very interesting to consider. Thank you. Pam, Andy, would you like to share any additional experience or if it was already captured?
Yeah, I think if you look at, I mirror Long Chun's kind of conditions in Singapore and Indonesia, right? I think it's very nascent to start seeing now, direct impact. But I imagine one thing that is very clear, at least, I always consider the road to be very loud, right? I think it's going to be a much quieter place, right? Nice. And if you can see, from a Gojek lens about employment, right? So imagine, a world where EV can provide some savings, right? Because it is actually proof that it is actually feasible to do so, right? Imagine that savings can actually be spent on somewhere that is more important rather than on a mobility spend or vehicle spend, right? It can be spent on education, upgrading skills, on healthcare, many tremendous things, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pam, any final thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so maybe I can just share some of the approach that we in ADB tackle the issue for our developing member countries. So to us, the EV project is not just about the EV. We also try to look for other co-benefits, how to marry advanced technology, how to leverage it to deliver positive impact to poverty reduction, like gender equality, environment, and these were issues also mentioned by Bert in his opening statement, and also touched upon by the stories that Sonika shared. And so the electrification of transport is not the EV, but crucially how it fits with the overall delivery of transport as a service to meet transport users' needs, and also the whole ecosystem of the business models needs to be explored. And so we try to develop projects with elements of, say, improving the efficiency, quality, and safety of the transport system itself. So not just replacing IC bus with like an e-bus, but how do you enhance the overall public transport system so it's safe, it's clean, and it's attractive to users? How do we integrate these systems with land use and urban cities, and integration of the fare structure? So all that transport planning principles are still so relevant even as we're trying to scale up e-mobility. And of course, inclusive design for vulnerable users, elderly, gender, disabled. How do we, through this technology and also with these considerations of human-centered design and all that, increase the uptake of overall, more sustainable transport alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Pam. We have a question coming in from the audience. How do panelists view the role of public consultation in designing and implementing zero or low emission vehicle strategies? So it's about the role of public consultations. How important do you think it is to design and implement low carbon strategies, low emission vehicle strategies? Who would you like to start? Perhaps may I ask Mr. Wu, and then following Mr. Chun, since you have a lot of experience in the sector. How, if I had to rephrase it, I would ask how important.
Yeah, I could not click that button to allow the voice. So Katrina, I just want to confirm that question. So how to penetrate that strategy for the public transportation?
No, sorry, perhaps it's the line. So how important is the role of public consultation in designing strategies on electric vehicles? So consulting.
Sorry, public what?
Consultation. So involving the public beyond policymakers.
Okay. Actually, I'm not a professional in this area. I just trying to see. I think for the public to be involved in this e-mobility strategy, I think the education is a very important issue. I just want to show one example. So previously, you know, most of the citizens they just feel feel worried about the mileage, right? So, for example, they always think about the electric vehicles just drive very short distance, and you may exhausted with the mileage, the short mileage with the battery exhaust. But after we have done a wide survey for the city, residents in many cities of China, we just feel for the in average for most of the people they drive just less than, for example, 40 kilograms or 50 kilograms. So for citizens, if they purchase electric cars, they do not need a very large battery. But previously there are always some feelings. So the people needs to drive as long as the previous the gasoline or diesel cars, just like the 700 kilometers. So that's something the people need to learn from the public domain to see to learn some knowledge from this.
Thank you.
Katerina, can I share some of the experience in Gojek on related with this, right?
Please go ahead.
So I think you know, if you look at my previous slides, it's about, you know, finding the technology solutions, you know, be it motorcycles, battery, and swap that works, right? So with us, I think user experience has been, you know, the forefront of you know our attention, right? We've done a few small scale trials and pilots, if you may, right? Asking our rider partners, right, on, you know, what is the experience of using an EV? What is a blocker, right? So that, you know, one of the pieces that we get from this kind of pilots is, again, range anxiety is a key when they want to try, but actually when they test it, apparently it becomes less apparent, right? So if you have the necessary infrastructure in place, range is no longer an issue. But to be able to, you know, for them to jump the gun, you need to kind of provide the infrastructure in the first place, right? That's number one. Two is, you know, charging time, be it, you know, 1 hour, you know, 1 hour is fast in an EV world, right? It doesn't work for us because it is like Wang Chun said, is a loss of income opportunity, right? Therefore, it needs to be something that is instant, right? And at the core of that, one of the key questions they ask is, you know, how, you know, is it more expensive? You know, therefore, we see this, you know, public consultation is something that is very key on deciding, you know, what are the technologies that really works, right? And what kind of infra design is needed, right?
Thank you. Yes, I would also like to ask for the Singaporean experience, since you made the strategy, right, by 2030 to get rid of regular cars, isn't it?
Yes,
or 2040. That's right. Okay.
2040 for all clean energy models. Thanks very much for this question. I think this is a great one. I think public consultation has a very important role policies. I think as Prof. Wu and Andy were sharing earlier, the shift to EVs constitutes a very fundamental shift, and there are some changes to driving behavior. There are certain mindset shifts, existing misconceptions about EVs, about chargings, that actually there is a need to actually consult, educate, and inform the public about it. In fact, I would just say it goes beyond consultation and partnership with public, but also with the broader industry, between government, the citizens, and actually private sector and industry players. To give an example, you know, if you look at the deployment of charging infrastructure in Singapore, you know, this is something I think that the all three parties, the government, companies, and actually the EV drivers actually need to consult hand in hand. Different stakeholder groups have different interests. From the Singapore government viewpoint, given that we are a very small country, land optimization and grid infrastructure planning is very critical to us, right? So that's where when we are planning the infrastructure, how do we deploy it? What kind of technologies we use, that's our key consideration. On the other hand, if you look at the EV users and EV drivers, what are their main concerns? Their main concerns are accessible and affordable charging services being widespread such that they can actually charge their vehicles as and when they require. They are also concerned about the transition to EVs. Is it safe? Is there are the charging technologies safe? There's a lot of news reports about battery fires with the ongoing environmental issues. There's increasing floods around the region. Will this affect our EVs? So from the user standpoint, affordability, accessibility, safety are very key considerations. And from the private sector, then when they are looking at deploying some of the solutions, they are thinking, hey, it's a business opportunity for my company, right? How do I develop new businesses about it? How do I embrace new technologies? How do I shift there? At the same time, how do I do it in a way that's sustainable for my businesses to grow? So in that way, communication, consultation amongst all stakeholders would actually be very key for us to adopt all of these new transport-related technologies. And that's what actually our team in the Land Transport Authority had actually been set out to do. So ever since we announced, I think, our vision, we have been proactively going out to actually engage with companies and, of course, definitely with citizens.
Thank you. Thank you. We are running a little bit behind, so I'm going to run a little bit faster. But Sonika, I just wanted to ask you if what is the role that public consultation has played in the development of the three-wheeler industry in Nepal? What is your view?
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, I just realized the time is 5:30. I have to catch a flight, so I have to leave. Sorry for that. I already talked to Bert about that.
Yes, so, and thank you very much.
Nice to see you guys. Sorry for that. Okay.
Thank you.
See you.
Safe flight. Sorry, Sonika.
Have a safe flight. Yeah, back to the question. The question was quite interesting because recently we ran a survey, a focus group survey for why people are taking the EV or why are they not taking the EV, right? And the insights were quite interesting, and it was not a very, very large survey, but then still the insights were quite interesting. And we saw that there's a potential of improving this sector with that kind of amount of sample data, right? Now think about if you are to run a public consultation and taking the public's feedback and comment on the future strategies, it will definitely change, because since I'm from the technical background, I'm a computer engineer. So if I build something and give to someone to use, they might not use it because it might not fit their need, right? So you always need to talk to the people who will be the end user, and then the product or any kind of strategy will be better and strong. So that's my view, and we have also seen that on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you. Pam, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you the option of answering these questions in the wrap up, simply because we're running out of time. We actually anticipated to have a poll on the challenges, but the panelists have already covered what they think are the key challenges in their countries. So if I actually encourage the participants from the audience to include it in the chat, what they consider to be the key challenges for the uptake of electric vehicles. So it'll be interesting to see the different contribution. Now, I have one final question that I'd like to ask whoever feels like answering, and then we can move on to wrapping the session. So, and the final question is related to what, and some of it has already been covered, is related to what are the key drivers behind the EV adoption? What are the things that are most valuable to consumers? I think you've already mentioned some of that. A follow-up to that question is, and women are known to be more conscious and sustainability-focused consumers. This is something that comes up again and again in surveys about sustainability and sustainably focused behavior. So I'd like to ask the speakers if this is something that corresponds to your experience, and if you've seen any particular pattern in this regard that you'd like to share with us today. I'd like to invite anyone who would like to share that feels that you've seen any pattern or any anecdotal evidence and you'd like to share it.
I'd like to give a quick remark on that because I work with the women micro entrepreneurs. So I've seen many different stories, and if the audience heard about the story that I talked about earlier, this industry, 30 years old industry, and all driven by women, I think I see a lot of pattern there, right? This project, Women-Driven Electric Vehicle project, was started by a development organization, and this has sustained for very long now. 30 years is a very, very long time. And we've seen that these women are still leading it. I know that more than 50% is now shifted towards men, but that's also okay. But the industry have sustained, and we still have this EV public transportation service available in Kathmandu, right? Even if it didn't grow. I've seen the pattern that women are better leader, be it the entrepreneurs or be it the non-defaulter in the financing system, right? The data is very, very evident that women does less defaults in all the financing systems. So I've definitely seen the pattern that they're more conscious environmentally and also in whatever they lead. That's the pattern that I've seen from my experience.
Thank you, Sunika. And Mr. Chung, perhaps have you seen any pattern in terms of demand from consumers that you might be aware of or you might have tracked? If not, we're happy to move on to the next poll. Okay. I take it as it's probably too early to see any such pattern. Understand. So we have one final poll for the day. Is as previously, yes, I already see that. You should be able to see it on your screen. Now, the difference between this poll and the previous one is that this one asks you to rank priorities. To rank priority areas of assistance from 1 to 5, 1 being the highest priority. I'll wait another few seconds. Okay, we'll give a few more seconds. Takes a little bit longer to rank the different priorities. Okay, so we see that the top priority, in terms of areas of assistance to scale up mobility is funding resources. So the funding remains a key issue. Number two, we've got the technical assistance in developing long-term roadmap. And then number three is the creation and strengthening of a government and institutional structures to promote transport energy nexus solutions. So these are the three things. And on that note, I think this is a perfect segue to give the floor to Pam from the Asian Development Bank to provide initial thoughts on the assistance needed from your perspective from the Asian Development Bank, and also provide closing remarks. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks very much, Katrina. So the polls are still moving, so it looks like we've got quite active engagement and people are thinking about the ranking, but it's really interesting. The creation and strengthening of government institutional structures to promote transport energy nexus solutions, that doesn't come as a surprise because it's a relatively new technology, and different regulatory, different structures are needed, institutional structures. And I think we've talked a lot about, how we all need a cross-cutting kind of multidisciplinary approach. And that's something that I think ADB and many other multilateral development banks, also working with UNEP to tackle this point. Capacity development is really important. The funding resource, that's our favorite question, of course, because we give out loans and grants. So yeah, we would love to support, viable and even pilot e-mobility solutions with developing member countries. So that's something that at least, we look forward to support. Knowledge transfer on technical know-how on designing, implementing, operating infrastructure. We heard from the stories earlier that this is absolutely critical. We need to, I think, many a times the hurdle is you don't know what you don't know. So I think, the last slide that I had presented, hopefully that will be a nice platform that we are going to be developing with UNEP to bring together all of us here and others as well, industry practitioners, private sector, financing and all that, and bring everybody in the room or a common platform to talk and discuss and get ideas on how to take forward, innovative ideas and how do we materialize that on the ground. So that's nice to know. So maybe since time is running out, I'll just take the opportunity to very quickly, not really give closing remarks, but because they're all very eminent speakers. So what I'll do, I'll just maybe very quickly recap. I really like what Bert opened with in terms of, electrification, digitalization, and what about the vulnerable users? Because this is also the core of what we at ADB do. And as I mentioned, it's not just about the EV itself, but we need to think about, transport service as a service delivery to meet the transport users' needs, right? And then Sonika mentioned about Bibi Shrestha. Thanks for sharing the story. I will never forget that. And that's the important thing about, it talks about empowering women. Again, it's a core of what we do in ADB. And how do we create jobs in the new economy to be more gender inclusive as well? And Prof. Wu shared really nice analyses on the life cycle assessment of the GHG. And I think those evidence, data and evidence-based approach is absolutely critical in order to informing decision makers and project sponsors in terms of identifying the appropriate projects on the most efficient means of decarbonizing transport. And of course, Andy mentioned, gave a really interesting insights from the private sector perspective, the project perspective. And it's, it really goes to show that this is not an issue that, an MDB can tackle alone, a country can tackle alone, the public sector can tackle alone. No, it is, it's a joint effort with the private sector as well. you're most, private sector is most efficient in, bringing in innovation and basically scaling things up for better cost efficiency. So it's nice to know that these collective efforts are happening on the ground, and we hope that with the new virtual platform, we can do a lot more together. And of course, Mr. Long Chun from LTA, it was really nice to hear the Singapore story on this as well. And it's really, I'm a Singaporean, so maybe a little bit biased. But I think the Singapore story, it's nice because there's a vision, there's a clear vision, and then there's a roadmap. And then there's a comprehensive approach to achieve that vision, the preferred vision. So we in ADB, we've been talking in the last year about how do we reimagine the future of transport. And I think, Singapore is an exemplary case where, making all these innovative ideas possible. So I think to end off on two key things, I guess, transport as a service. The question that was being raised, I think, is absolutely important. What is the role of public consultation? And Long Chun has expanded that on, we need to talk about the overall stakeholders. And, in ADB, we're increasingly talking about the user-centered approach. The users, who are the users? Now, Gojek is a user. And, we have the EV manufacturers, the battery manufacturers and all that, right? So all those we have to take into consideration. The business needs fast chargers. So if we don't consult them, then, the slow chargers will not work for them. We can put a very nice, e-bus. But then, if the last mile connectivity is not good enough, like if myself as a woman, if my last mile to the bus station or the bus stop is not safe, not secure, no number of EVs is going to help me assess employment in a safe way using the e-bus. So those kinds of things needs to be considered. Decarbonizing transport, we're also talking about non-motorized transport, walking cycle modes, and how do they feel about the options that are available to them. And we're also talking about the people who are delivering food Panda for Grab and all that. They're on their two-wheelers as well. Is it safe? Do they have safe and protected pathways for them? So I think this whole idea of the user-centered approach in terms of incorporating EV, digitalization and all that, those are really important conversations to have. And so just to wrap up, the decarbonizing transport, I feel it's not just a transport sector issue, it's a cross-cutting issue, as we've talked about. It's with energy colleagues, it's also with climate change policies, with the private sector and our users. So with that, I think I end my closing remarks and hand back over to you, Katerina. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for adding your final thoughts and for making it also so very practical and pragmatic. That was really useful. So we are now coming to the end of the session. I'd like to thank all our panelists and our participants for joining us and for sharing your experience on electric mobility. It is clear from this session that electric mobility plays an important role, and I'm very excited about to see how it's going to enrich and improve our lives. On behalf of our partners, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the session on the future of sustainable transport, electric mobility, and digitalization to address air pollution. This is the end of day number 1 of the third Asia Pacific Cleaner Partnership Join Tomorrow. I'd like to invite you to join us again tomorrow. We start at 9 a.m. Bangkok time with a plenary session on addressing a burning problem, case studies from Asia to help improve air quality. There is a very rich program, and if you can't join real life, I'd like to invite you to keep an eye on cleanerweek.org, where we'll be posting content on demand, and you can watch it on demand. Again, I am Caterina Meloni, and it has been my pleasure moderating this session, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you.